Good morning, you're watching Daybreak live on A News and I'm your host Nadia Gyane, here to take you through the day's top stories and the key headlines. So let's go to them. It's official, Trump announces peace deal with Iran to end the war and open up the Strait of Hormuz. Ukraine capital was hit with Russian missile and drone attacks in the early hours of Monday morning. And 11 skydivers and one pilot have been killed in a plane crash in the US. First this morning, there's been a lot of movement overnight, especially in relation to Iran and the US, because the United States and Iran have now reached a framework agreement to end the hostilities. It follows months of conflict between Israel, the US and Iran. So now let's go to this report for more information.
The United States and Iran have reached a framework agreement to end hostilities. US President Donald Trump announced on social media on Sunday. In a series of posts, Trump confirmed the deal is complete, authorizing the toll-free reopening of the Strait of Hormuz and calling for the immediate removal of the US naval blockade. He added that the deal will be signed on Friday. His announcement came shortly after Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif announced the agreement on social media, stating that it is intended to end fighting on all fronts, including Lebanon. Shehbaz Sharif also confirmed that an official signing ceremony is scheduled for Friday, June 19th in Switzerland. Reports indicate that US Vice President J.D. Vance may attend, while Trump's participation has not been fully confirmed. Iran's Deputy Foreign Minister Kazem Garibabadi, speaking on state TV, confirmed that the Memorandum of Understanding is finalized and that the US naval blockade against Iran will end Sunday night. He confirmed that military operations on all fronts, including Lebanon, will cease immediately and permanently. Iran's Supreme National Security Council also issued a statement confirming that military operations on all fronts will halt immediately and that the US blockade on Iranian shipping will be lifted. Following the announcement, the United Kingdom, France, Germany and Italy said on Sunday that they are prepared to lift sanctions on Iran in response to steps taken on its nuclear program. In a joint statement, the leaders emphasized that Iran must never acquire a nuclear weapon and said they are ready to work with the United States, Iran, and the IAEA to ensure compliance. Full implementation of the agreement is expected after the signing ceremony Friday, with Pakistan, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey credited for facilitating the negotiations.
Now let's take a look at the stories shaping the day across the globe, and we head first to our top story, which is going to be everywhere since the announcement over the course of this morning with the Iran war. US and Tehran reach framework for peace. Now, as you just heard in our top story there, that there has been a framework that both countries have agreed to, and the US and Iran have agreed to a ceasefire agreement, which happened on Sunday US time, the early hours of this morning. Now, the deal with the Islamic Republic of Iran is now complete, is what President Trump said in his social media post Truth. Now, the agreement will be signed on Friday in Europe, and Iran and Pakistan said it would take place in Geneva. Now, the text of the agreement was not immediately released, so we don't actually have the full information of what each side has decided to agree upon, but both are declaring it as a diplomatic victory after nearly 4 months of war. But some of the thorniest issues, including the fate of Iran's nuclear program and sanctions relief for Tehran, remain unresolved and has been pushed to further rounds of negotiations. Now, in a statement, the Supreme National Security Council said that the agreement called for an immediate end to military operations on all fronts, which also includes Lebanon. Now, we know that Israel did strike Lebanon on Sunday, and Iran did not retaliate, and Trump was very firm when it came to that. However, since the agreement, Israel has not commented on this either, and the agreement it did seem like it was at risk, as I mentioned, as Israel did bomb southern parts of Beirut in relation to that. However, now we know that this framework is currently in the works, and both countries and world leaders are very much in support of the two coming together, and for the Strait of Hormuz, most importantly, to be back and reopened as well. Now, it was Trump's birthday on Sunday, which he's celebrating his time Monday, our time. So he's very happy that this has all happened as well. But major questions still remain unanswered, especially in the fate of Iran's nuclear program, and Lebanon being a stumbling block for both parties. Now, there was some reportings of a 14-point memorandum of understanding between the US and Iran that has been picked up by one of a local news outlet in Iran, and it was basically pointing out a few things that I'm just going to read out to you now, so we kind of have a bit of an understanding as to what Iran is really wanting now. They say they're a permanent ceasefire on all fronts, including Lebanon, which we know of, US commitment not to interfere with Iran's internal affairs, a lifting of the US naval blockade within 30 days, US withdrawal of forces from Iran, the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz to happen within 30 days under Iranian arrangements. The next one was the US and its allies delivering reconstruction plans for Iran worth at least $300 billion, ending sanctions on Iranian oil and energy products, the reiteration of Iran's commitment not to produce nuclear weapons, and the US commitment not to increase its forces in the region and not impose sanctions. And just adding the extra final one that they've put here, also the final negotiations will not begin before half of Iran's frozen funds are released. So that's just some of the information that we have, but we will provide you with more throughout the course of the morning on the program. As you can tell, this is quite important as to finally these two countries who've been at war since February the 28th now coming to some form of agreement, which is mediated by Pakistan in all of this. So there you go. As you were sleeping, this is what was happening. Now let's go to our next story this morning, and that's on the Guardian website, and that's in relation to what's happened in Switzerland, because Swiss voters reject proposal to cap population at 10 million. So just to give you some context into this, there were votes in Switzerland over a far-right proposal to cap the country's population at 10 million, and it was it was a divisive referendum dubbed as the Swiss Brexit. As you know, the UK went through a Brexit, a separation from the EU a number of years ago. So now they were dubbing this as the Swiss Brexit, and some 54.79% of voters were against the proposal by the Swiss People's Party, and 45.21% were in favour. Now the turnout in total was 58.86, which was just over half the population there that came out to vote. Now, a different outcome, if it did go in the Swiss party favour, it would have meant that the Swiss government had to limit the population, which is currently at 9.1 million, to 10 million by the year 2050. Now, they would have to enact tough restrictions on family reunification, residency permits and asylum if the number had reached 9.5 million before that date. And under the proposals, if the threshold of 10 million was exceeded before 2050, the Swiss government would have been obliged to withdraw from the country's free movement agreement with the EU, which actually ends the access to the bloc's single market. So quite a few things were on stake in relation to that. And as you can see from this graph, this is just Switzerland's population here, which basically stating if it comes up to 9.1 million, what the government would have needed to do. So it's currently now at, in pink, as you can see, it's currently around 9 million. And if it increases by 20, I can't really see that figure there, but I think it says 2050, it could have risen higher, and what that would have meant later on. Now, the Swiss People's Party, which has the most seats in Parliament, has years fueled anti-immigration sentiment, especially concerning workers from neighbouring EU countries, which was why they really wanted to push for this referendum. Now, the party had insisted that a so-called sustainability initiative was needed, which is what they kind of addressed this matter under, in order to increase the population, which it argued was putting pressure on Swiss infrastructure, housing, social programs, natural resources and the way of life there. So now we know that this is not going ahead, but that's some of the things that would have happened if the voting went the other way round. Okay, now let's move over to our next story this morning, and that's in relation to President Donald Trump and his birthday, because on the Washington Post, it's showing Trump hosts UFC fights on the White House lawn. Now, President Donald Trump turned 80 on Sunday, spending his evening hosting the Ultimate Fighting Championship on the South Lawn of the White House, as you can see here, and it's underway currently, so some of this is already taking place. Now, the event that has transformed grounds in what historians call an unprecedented way. The price tag for the UFC and its affiliates say that it was more than $60 million, far higher than any typical event there. But the chief executive of UFC's parent organization, TKO Group Holdings, said the publicity was worth it. Now, Trump holds a small stake in the company, which also raises concerns of ethics within this. Now, the event ran well behind schedule due to the weather. It was quite windy and rainy, and there was lightning, and there was a key concern because it was being held outdoors and the event under a towering metal superstructure in the area. That was according to the National Weather Service, but as you can see, things definitely kicked off in relation to that, and it's what President Donald Trump really wanted to show UFC fighting on his lawn, something that he's very much interested in. If we keep scrolling down, you'll just see some of the fighters there coming out in a bout for Donald Trump's birthday as a celebration. So it's what he wanted and what he actually put together there. And that's the morning press roundup of the headlines we have this morning. Now I'm going to take a quick break. When I return, I'll discuss the rest of the global stories. Don't go anywhere.
We are in Seoul, the Republic of Korea, a country that for more than 70 years has lived in the shadow of unfinished war.
I was 18 years old when the Korean War broke out. My two brothers were dragged out to the front yard of the village public hall and forcibly subjected to a trial under the name of People's Trial.
The military demarcation line, created after the Korean War, became a massive wall, preventing separated families from meeting.
Less than a kilometer away lies North Korea.
지금 우리 무장력은 그 어떤 위기에도 대응할 철저한 준비가 되어 있으며
Подписанный сегодня договор предусматривает в том числе оказание взаимной помощи в случае агрессии против одного из участников.
Russian-Ukraine war now is connected with North Korean participation in Russian army.
The complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula is the only outcome that we will find acceptable.
If the U.S. persists in such hostile policy towards the DPRK, there will never be denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula.
Welcome back. You're watching Daybreak. Now let's have a look at the global stories this morning. We head over to keeping with our top story because international reactions continue to pour in following the announcement of a peace memorandum between the United States and Iran. Global leaders and the United Nations are welcoming the diplomatic breakthrough, emphasizing the immediate need to restore maritime stability and secure global energy corridors ahead of the formal signing in Switzerland. Here is a roundup of the world reactions.
Major Western powers and global markets are calling for the swift execution of the US-Iran peace agreement. French President Emmanuel Macron and British Prime Minister Keir Starmer called for the unconditional reopening of the Strait of Hormuz to restore freedom of navigation. This optimism was echoed by German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, who described the deal as a breakthrough for the global economy. In the Asia-Pacific, leaders from Japan, Australia and New Zealand noted that stabilising energy shipments will directly ease pressure on global supply chains. Regional mediators are emphasising stability ahead of Friday's official signing ceremony in Switzerland. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan welcomed the agreement as a crucial step for regional tranquility, while urging all parties to refrain from actions or provocations that could undermine the diplomatic progress. Qatar also extended its backing, reaffirming its support for continued constructive dialogue. The global endorsements were backed by the United Nations, which hailed the framework as a critical step toward a peaceful settlement. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres formally congratulated both Washington and Tehran on the permanent ceasefire, while acknowledging the constructive role played by regional nations in supporting the negotiations.
There are now fresh signs of relief for global energy markets as traders respond to developments that could reshape oil supply flows from the Middle East, now that the Strait of Hormuz is likely to reopen in the next 30 days. Here's more.
Oil prices fell sharply on Monday after the United States and Iran announced an initial agreement to end their conflict, raising hopes that energy supplies from the Middle East could begin returning to global markets. Brent crude dropped more than 4% to $83.75 a barrel, while US West Texas Intermediate fell nearly 5% to $80.87. Both benchmarks had already lost more than 3% last Friday. The latest decline comes after months of volatility driven by the conflict, which disrupted shipping and energy exports across the region. Before the conflict began in late February, Brent crude was trading at around $70 a barrel. During the conflict, prices surged to roughly $120 as concerns grew over supply shortages and disruptions to trade. Investors are now closely watching how quickly oil producers in the Middle East can restore production and exports, and whether shipping activity in the region returns to normal. Analysts warn the market could face another week of uncertainty and sharp price swings as traders await further details of the agreement. Energy experts have also cautioned that oil flows through the Strait of Hormuz are unlikely to return to pre-conflict levels immediately, meaning a full recovery in supply could take time.
Keeping with the top story this morning and the peace deal which was announced overnight, we're now going to go to our guest, Mile Demirtaş, political analyst and former diplomat in Ankara in Turkey this morning to discuss these developments, and quite a shocking development that's happened quite quickly. Hello and welcome to the programme.
Hello, good morning, Ms. Nadia. Thank you.
Morning. Let's get straight to it. We know that this war, this conflict between the US, Iran and Israel has been going on for nearly 4 months now, and a deal has finally been announced overnight this morning that Iran and the US has come to some form of framework. What does this now mean? We've been waiting for this for quite a while, and now things seem to have come to a head and to fruition. Is this good news on all sides?
Thank you once again for having me. And yes, we all, I think, waiting such a news for, as we said, for 4 months. I think for more than 4 months, we must accept that this turmoil in the Middle East is still going on. But this war actually changed something. This war, as a total war, I think it's been important, strong players, of the region. Of course, United States and Israel started it, but Iran also retaliated and attacked, I think, with all its force, with all its maybe new technologies. Someone's, of course, some personalities call them cheap technologies, but still, Iran also proved that this conflict can be shaped in different directions. And just in this first days, in this maybe first week, which we're also witnessing this World Cup, it's a very important event. We must accept it's also held by United States, Mexico, and Canada. And I think Mr. Trump's birthday is also it's very maybe popular news nowadays in international media. But still, of course, these are the side news. But the main maybe event in this last week is this agreements and the motivation of the agreement between the sides. Both Iranian official leaders, Iranian maybe foreign minister are actually always spelled that this possibility is so near, so close. And also Mr. Trump, I think, gave some important and very direct signal to an actor, which is Israel. I think we must accept that Israel had some other plans, some other maybe agenda still. We don't know what will, of course, take place in the coming days in Lebanon. Unfortunately, in Palestine, some crisis is still going on. But at least for the United States and Israel level, we can say, yes, this agreement on the documentary, in the text, it can work. Also, it maybe took now the first important support from the international community, from France, from United Kingdom, from Turkey, I think, to Azerbaijan, some other important countries. All supported, I think, now this agreement. And we are I think, hopeful since this beginning of this destructive war.
Definitely. I think there's a wide sense of relief from around the globe when it comes to this peace deal, especially in relation to the Strait of Hormuz and getting oil vessels through that and the economies in certain places back up and running. We know that a number of countries were impacted by the lack of oil because of the war in Iran, and now that's being opened. What does that tell us about conflict when it comes to the Middle East in this particular area and the US? Now, later on, I'm sure we'll be able to dive a bit deeper into what all this means with the tactics and what Iran was able to do and what the US was able to do. And now that they've come together, it just now seems that, was this all necessary at the end of the day? Did the US achieve its main goals when it decided to obviously attack Iran? And as you mentioned previously before, Israel is also very much a key actor in this, and they have not spoken out in relation to this agreement, and they're very much wide awake right now, so they would have seen what would have happened. So it's quite interesting and quite telling as to what Israel might be thinking in relation to this deal. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, the world's changing. I mean, the post-Second World War or Cold War years, we already passed those periods. I mean, United States still act sometimes like it is the victorious side, very the strongest sides, like in this post-Second World War era. But of course, there are now some other rising forces. I will not call Iran as a very huge rising force. No, Iran is just an actor. It's a regional actor, a strong actor, we must accept, the cultural, also communitarian actor. It has relations with all these, important, of course, neighbors like Turkey, Azerbaijan, or even some Gulf countries or Turkey countries. And Iran used this influence area, also with the relations, of course, with China and Russia. You must not forget that important visit of Mr. Trump, China, in this last month. And after this visits and high-level negotiations, some things also changed in this region. I think this actor, Israel, maybe has some difficulty in understanding that this Cold War times or this power politics is really changing. And still, I think Mr. Netanyahu, with some far-rightist ministers, we are really sorry to see them just speaking in a high scale, like Second World War atmosphere. But no, the world is not this. In the last 4 months, we saw that how the world is so interconnected, interrelated about this Strait of Hormuz, how the price can affect all the economy from Thailand to Germany. All this fuel or this plane jet fuels or oil and everything is needed for the humanity and for the economy, I think, in such a part of the world. So I think this country, first of all, Israel will understand, will have some lesson and about this interconnectedness. I think United States will shape its foreign policy according to these new rules of the game. And I think the diplomacy will go on, especially between Russia, China, and the United States.
Yes, and I think just on that, obviously a number of things we will see later on as it plays out in real time. We know that there's going to be a signing of this agreement in Geneva on Friday towards the end of this week in relation to that. But just on the fact of the mediator playing a key role, Pakistan really stepped in to bring these two sides together. How important was their role in making sure both actors came to the table and was able to make some form of agreement? Now, putting that to one side, we know there are two issues that are still on the table, and that is Iran's nuclear program. That hasn't been mentioned in this framework agreement, and maybe even Lebanon. So what happens now? How do we navigate that particular story?
Yes, there are many issues, and because yes, we have a time limit, but I really want to, of course, touch on this, maybe these last things you mentioned. This is the most difficult, of course, articles or parts, maybe in the coming days, this nuclear program, the enrichment of uranium, and of course, the humanitarian or social, very deep issues, which includes, of course, Lebanon, but also Palestine somehow. I think this region is still burning. We must accept that some civilian infrastructure cannot, of course, win at the end of the day. Still, this real politics of this agreement, the diplomatic chains, and this presidential level of talking, sometimes it doesn't mean to humanitarian or civilian life, as we see in Lebanon and Palestine. But because of this, we need international organization, international community. Because of this, Ms. Nadia, we need like a spirit of United Nations in the coming maybe phases of this agreement. Switzerland, as you said, Geneva is a very symbolic, maybe, the place for such agreement. But it is not about this Switzerland spirit. It's something about this international spirit. We must have this, first of all. And Iran, of course, should understand that yes, it is the capability of this independent programs, but it must do this according to some rules, according to the rule of the games, maybe of the United Nations agencies. It is the most important maybe article, and it will be discussed, I think, in this coming decades. We will see, but some issues is still so sensitive. The textual, the documentary part is now finished, but now the peace in practice, we will be, observing this important sensitive era, I think, as all the regional actors like Turkey, Azerbaijan, which really attribute the highest importance for the stability of Turkey.
Yes, definitely. The way that it impacted the region, especially within the Gulf states and further across the Middle East, even the South Caucasus, because we know that Azerbaijan was also received some a strike here accidentally, is what Iran had mentioned. So a lot of countries were very much impacted by the war with the US and Israel, and are now looking hopefully at the other side of things, hoping that there will be a lot more better peace and stability. Now, in one state media has actually clarified, I want to just bring that to your attention, saying that as part of their 14 list of requirements, they've said the US and its allies delivering reconstruction plans for Iran worth at least $300 billion. Now, it's something that Iran has said that they want money to obviously repair what has been taking place in the war, as well as I'm sure the Gulf states will be wanting some form of recompense when it comes to a number of sites and buildings and infrastructure that was unfortunately attacked during this war. Do you think it's likely that the US and its allies will be able to fit a bill that Iran is asking for?
This is the important question, a good question. Thank you. Because always we know the phrase, the expression that money talks. And in the end of maybe conflict, in the end of a very even devastating war, sometimes money is always changing something. Think about the Second World War, how Germany's turned to be another player of the world politics. I mean, with Marshall Plan, with Truman doctrines, everything that comes from the United States side after such a devastating war. Now, of course, after another war, which is not so high scale, fortunately, we can say that, yes, some recompensation, some money, of course, some new investment plans we need in the region. I mean, first of all, for Iranian case, the actor is the United States here. The war started with the United States. Of course, we must not forget this provocation, just in the last 3 years of Israeli act in the higher, regional scale. But still, the United States started something, and now there must be a bill, I think, for some actors. As you said, yes, even the South Caucasus neighbor, brother Azerbaijan is also affected. Also Qatar, important now, negotiators deal with Pakistan. For your last question, I will also maybe mention that two actors have an important division of labor, I think, in this last phase. And they also affected, the Gulf countries in somehow, in communitarian level, especially in the level of trusting to the United States, trusting to Israel, Iran. Even months ago, please do not forget that some rockets, some military attacks also directed from Israel to Qatar, and now from Iran to Qatar. So even of this very dilemma or dramatic procedures, we see that Qatar is doing its best, to be in the negotiating table. And now Iran maybe will have another word. Just as you said, this compensation will be the issue, because I think the number one thing what Iran is now to reconstruct the economy. Because of this regime, difficulties, we must accept that still in Iran there is a regime problem with its own community. About democratic situation, we cannot, of course, say that Iran is a fully, democratic style of communitarian, state, but it doesn't have any relation with this attack, of this one-sided United States-Israel attack. But still, Iran must solve this issue in the communitarian, in the economy level. So it maybe needs this help or support, first from the United States, but also from the European partners, to change maybe its procedures more democratically in a more humanitarian sense.
Yes, well, thank you so much, Mr. Demirtaş, for coming onto the programme on quite short notice to discuss this major feat as the two sides have come together in signing a peace deal, which means that stability in the Middle East can continue. So let's see how it all goes. Now we move over from one war and conflict in the Middle East to another in Europe, because Kyiv has come under a new wave of Russian airstrikes, including damage near the historic Pershgek Lavra Monastery, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The escalation comes as diplomatic efforts continue ahead of the upcoming G7 summit.
Kyiv came under a series of Russian air attacks early Monday, leaving 6 people injured and igniting fires at a high-rise apartment building and the historic Pechersk Lavra Monastery. Electricity lines were damaged, leaving 140,000 residents without power. Explosions from drones and missiles were reported across the city, and air raid warnings extended to the regions of Dnipro and Kharkiv. In Kharkiv, Russian airstrikes killed 5 people and injured at least 5 more, authorities said. The attacks caused significant damage to residential buildings and infrastructure across the city. Meanwhile, in Russia's Oriol city, Ukrainian drones struck a high-rise apartment building, killing 1 person and injuring 9 others. Amid the attacks, diplomacy continues. US President Donald Trump held separate calls on Sunday with Russian President Vladimir Putin and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, discussing efforts to end the war in Ukraine and developments involving Iran ahead of the upcoming G7 summit.
I have just spoken with the President of the United States of America, with President Trump. I congratulated him on his birthday, on US Army Day. Today, there are 2 holidays in America, and we had a very good conversation. It was not just congratulations. There were many key topics about the war, its roots, and diplomatic prospects.
The Kremlin said Trump's call with Putin lasted 55 minutes and focused on the conflict, bilateral relations, and coordination between officials. Trump's special envoys, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, are expected to return to Moscow to continue discussions.
Staying on this topic, Poland scrambled fighter jets and placed its air defense systems on high alert on Monday after Russia launched attacks on Kyiv and other parts of Ukraine. The Polish armed forces said the measures were aimed at protecting airspace near the Ukrainian border. Military operations later ended with no violations of Polish airspace reported. Now over to the UK, where Royal Marine Commandos boarded a Russian Shadow Fleet oil tanker in the English Channel on Sunday. Marines joined by National Crime Agency officers intercepted and boarded the vessel in a 6-hour operation. It was the first of its kind by UK armed forces. The vessel will be held and monitored off the south coast of England while investigations continue. 1 Indian national was arrested on suspicion of sanctions offences, while 24 Georgian and Indian crew members remain on board assisting authorities. British banks have reported a 19% increase in authorised push payment fraud losses last year, with victims losing more than $775 million. UK Finance said investment purchases and romance scams all reached record levels, with many cases originating on social media and online platforms. The figures come as banks review rules requiring reimbursement for many fraud victims. The industry is now calling for tougher obligations on technology companies to help prevent scams and share the cost of compensation. Over to Switzerland, and voters there have rejected a proposal to cap the country's population at 10 million. Results showed that nearly 55% of people voted against the measure. The referendum was championed by right-wing Swiss People's Party. It said it wants to end the freedom of movement with the European Union if the population limit exceeds. The government and business groups warn that the measure could damage the economy and hinder recruitment of essential workers. Over to Gaza, and Israeli strikes and gunfire have killed at least 6 Palestinians in the Gaza Strip on Sunday. That's according to health officials. 4 people died in Jabalia refugee camp, while 2 others were killed in Khan Yunis and Gaza City. The Israeli military did not immediately comment on the incidences. The attacks came as mediators from Egypt, Qatar and Turkey wrapped up talks with Hamas. They discussed implementing the second phase of US President Donald Trump's Gaza plan, aimed at disarming Hamas and withdrawing Israeli forces. Over to the US, and 11 skydivers and a pilot have died after a private aircraft crashed in Missouri. The plane went down shortly after taking off from a local airport around 100 kilometers south of Kansas City on Sunday. Now, according to aircraft operator, the plane failed to gain altitude, made a sharp left turn and crashed near the runway. Local officials say some family members of those who were on board witnessed the crash. US aviation authorities are now investigating the cause of the accident. Staying on this, another horrible crash was also incurred by 6 people who were killed on Sunday when 2 helicopters collided in the air over Rio de Janeiro and crashed in the city's western zone. One aircraft fell into a car dealership car park where parked electrical vehicles subsequently caught fire. Firefighters said the blaze was intensified by the vehicle's lithium batteries. American singer and comedian Oliver Tree was listed among the passengers, although authorities have not formally identified the victims.
Bateu os 2 helicópteros, mano.
Now to a quick break. When I return, we'll take a look at the regional stories and have a guest to discuss some key information. Don't go anywhere.
On World Business, we meet the boardroom leaders making market-moving decisions. And find out how leaders are dealing with continuous technological disruption.
Welcome back and thank you for joining me this morning. Now let's turn to the region, and also one of the biggest stories happening this week and throughout the course of June is the World Cup. Now, as the countdown to the 2026 FIFA World Cup continues, there's excitement building for what promises to be the biggest tournament in football history. With more teams, more host cities and storylines already taking shape, there's plenty to discuss. Joining me now is Sarhan Hussanov, Head of Football Development Department at the AFFA UEFA. Now, welcome to the programme.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming on. So we know that the Football World Cup kicked off on Friday, the first day, the 11th of June, and we've seen a couple of triumphant stories so far. Japan beat off Dutch, the Netherlands, didn't beat, but they equalised 2-2, which was a surprise as well. Germany really had a great show with a 7-1. A number of different things coming out. But I just wanted to kind of just put it on the wider scale as how big is this tournament going to be?
It's really big. It's, as you know, it's structurally the most significant one so far, since it grew up to 48 teams. And World Cup is the most expected tournament in the football world. And I would say it is the biggest advertisement of the football. You know, many nations look for it, kids look for it, you know, they just check, even if they don't know their nations are there or not, they still look for their nations players if they can see it there. So it is really big, and so everyone has high expectations. As always, there are going to be new trends emerging in football, sports science, in coaching, in player pathways, and in the, again, open debates. So
no, definitely. And you mentioned, you know, there's going to be so much changes. We know there has been changes because FIFA has introduced new rules as well, you know, making sure that players leave the pitch on time, that they don't delay if they have an injury, if they're changing players, to make sure the player comes on in a good amount of time. Otherwise they'll have to wait for another minute. All of these things to make sure the game is done and executed in the best way. But also, if we can also look at it, as you mentioned, like so many countries are very much interested to see how their team are, you know, how their countries are going to perform. How can a sporting remain politically neutral? We know that politics do play some form of, you know, extra additional kind of element to this. So how can it remain politically neutral, or can it not?
Well, it is a fair debate. So it is, of course, the FIFA's one of the main aims is to always increase the revenues of their tournaments. So it is the growing to 48 countries. It brings a lot of things alongside aiming to grow the revenues, and the rule changes aim to, you know, to make the game more fair, to make it more, you know, watchable for the fans. As it always says, it is first for the fans. Mm-hmm. And the fans, of course, generally do not like it when the ball is out for a long time during the game. So these rule changes are all, I would say, good. Of course, it will take also some time for FIFA officials, for the people in the game, mm-hmm. to adapt to those changes of the rules. So by the time, I think it will serve better for the good of the game.
I see. Yeah, no, that's really good. Now, we can't get away from what's happened overnight. There's been a massive change in relation to relations with the US and Iran. Now they've got a peace deal. Major news, major story. As we know, there's been fighting since February, and now they've decided to, you know, call a peace truce and a peace talk. Now we know Iran is playing in the World Cup, and they've had to make subsidies because they can fly to certain places. They're in Tijuana, and then they move to other places. And one of the footballers that actually spoke about this as well.
Absolutely, and I think we can expect maybe now better, more surprising performance from Iran. Maybe, you know, I'm sure that will help them.
Yes.
So that will motivate them more. So Iran, of course, has always had a good performance when they have participated in the World Cups. But this now, with this news, with this good, peaceful news, I think we can expect even more from them.
Yeah, well, definitely a lot of eyes will be watching, and I think for Iran to re-perform and do their best is something that I'm sure there'll be a shift in how they do that, because they're playing New Zealand tomorrow on Tuesday. So
relatively they start, of course, let's say on the paper easy game, but and then, of course, it's another debate, you know, to grow the game to 48 teams. There will be some lopsided games in the group stages mainly. And Iran starts, as I said, relatively easy, but it's good. So we can expect also from New Zealand. It's as I know, it's their first time joining the World Cup. So it's another excitement for them, for the first time to join, to show the kids back in their countries we are here. So it will be a really interesting game. Yeah.
Yes, definitely. All eyes are definitely on the World Cup. And it was lastly hosted in Qatar in 2024. No, I'm wrong. 2022. Yeah. But either way, it was hosted in Qatar. Now it's being hosted in Canada, the US, and Mexico. Yeah. The first time, but all three countries have decided to host it. Is this something we're going to see more of? Maybe multiple countries hosting the World Cup? And is that good for the players? Because obviously they're having to travel to all these different nations. What type of pressure does that put on players?
Yeah, it has good and it has, of course, some downside points. For example, now, as I checked, I don't remember which game, but some game will be like, for some game, some teams will travel around 10,000 kilometers between the matches. So, and especially right after the World Cup starts, congested league tournaments in their own countries and UEFA tournaments. So, some top players will play around 7 matches on average, 7 matches here. So in tournament, of course, it has some, by sports science point of view, some downside points. Now the teams, the nations, coaching squads need to be really fast and scientific and really balanced between teaching, training something and rehabilitation, so recovery. So it will teach them also something. Let's look from this point of view. But on the other hand, of course, it is good for those countries like Canada, USA and Mexico, so to show their skills, how they can organize the tournaments and to bring the World Cup, as we said before, the biggest tournament of the football, to their kids, to their country, and to make them live it in their own country. So.
And very quickly on that, because obviously it's the 3rd, 4th day now in, what will fans take away from this particular World Cup? Because President Donald Trump thinks it's going to be the biggest, the best, but how do you measure success? How would you know that it's going to be successful just because it's bigger?
Okay, so again, there are debates about some qualities of the individual matches. That's the biggest debate when FIFA tried to, or they increased the number of nations. And that's a fair debate again. But I'm a football coach, and as being the head of football development in a country, FA, so for me, the quality about the tournament is not about individual matches. It's about how such a big organization like FIFA or UEFA, they can make it last with a longer wave of participation in the countries. So how to make it more accessible to the kids, how to increase the participation in the sport by the kids. So let's say like 2034, next cup, it's the players who are going to play it are now 8-10 years old. So, and the FIFA World Cup brings more investment in FAs, in federations, in coaching, in infrastructure. So the kids now watching it 8, 9 years old, 10 years old, they are going to play in 2024, the World Cup. So it is, I think we are going to see a good impact of the bigger tournament, being it hosted by 3 countries, and again, new trends will come on coaching, in sports science, in data analysis. So all these federations are going to invest in this in order to participate, since it looks more accessible now.
Yes.
as being it in 48 teams. So.
Okay, wow. Well, thank you so much for coming onto the program and explaining that, Mr. Husanov. We'll be paying very close attention as to how this all transpires and who makes it to the finals, because we don't know. Probably going to be France and Spain, but we'll see.
Thank you for inviting, and enjoy the World Cup.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Azerbaijan's President Ilham Aliyev has congratulated US President Donald Trump on his 80th birthday. The greeting was shared on Aliyev's official social media account. In his congratulatory letter, he wished Trump good health, a long life, and continued success in his work. He noted that Trump had played an important role in strengthening the strategic partnership between Azerbaijan and the United States. Aliyev stated that the Strategic Partnership Charter, signed following a meeting at the White House last year, had elevated relations between the two countries to a new level. He also praised Trump's contribution to the ongoing peace process in the South Caucasus. Hikmat Hajiev, assistant to the president of Azerbaijan, and Armen Grigoryan, secretary of Armenia's Security Council, met in Armenia on Sunday. The two officials discussed issues related to the Azerbaijan-Armenia peace agenda and normalization process. They also stressed the importance of maintaining bilateral dialogue to support lasting peace and stability in the region. It was a week today that we found out that Nikol Pashinyan's party won Armenia's elections. Well, since then, its Central Election Commission announced the final results of the parliamentary elections. The ruling Civil Contract Party, led by Pashinyan, secured nearly 50% of the vote. Strong Armenia finished second with 23.27%, followed by the Armenia Bloc with 9.92%. The prosperous Armenia Party narrowly failed to enter parliament, receiving 3.98%. That's just below the 4% threshold required for the representation in the National Assembly. As a result, only 3 political forces will hold seats in the new parliament. It's now time for a quick break, but when I return, I'll have a full update on the latest headlines, plus a look at what's making the front pages this morning. Don't go anywhere.
We are in Seoul, the Republic of Korea, a country that for more than 70 years has lived in a shadow of unfinished war.
I was 18 years old when the Korean War broke out. My 2 brothers were dragged out to the front yard of the village public hall and forcibly subjected to a trial under the name of People's Trial.
The military demarcation line, created after the Korean War, became a massive wall, preventing separated families from meeting.
Less than a kilometer away lies North Korea.
지금 우리 무장력은 그 어떤 위기에도 대응할 철저한 준비가 되어 있으며
Подписанный сегодня договор предусматривает в том числе оказание взаимной помощи в случае агрессии против одного из участников.
Russian-Ukraine war now is connected with North Korean participation in Russian army.
The complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula is the only outcome that we will find acceptable.
If the U.S. persists in such hostile policy towards the DPRK, there will never be denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula.
Hello, you're watching Daybreak live on A News, and if you're just joining me, I'm your host, Nadia Gyane, here to take you through the top stories. So let's take a look at the key headlines. It's official. Trump announces peace deal with Iran to end the war and open up the Strait of Hormuz. Ukraine capital was hit with Russian missile and drone attacks in the early hours of Monday morning. And 11 skydivers and 1 pilot have been killed in a plane crash in the US. Now let's go to the story shaping the day across the globe, and we head first over to ESPN, staying with our talk discussion with relation to the World Cup, because Sweden top Group F after Netherlands, Japan draw. So what's been going on over the course of the World Cup? Well, we know there's been several matches that's happened in our time early this morning, and we can now bring you some of those results. But just another factor to also add in that the World Cup kickoffs have actually been taking a bit of a delay in order for things to take place, is what fans have been noticing. Group C in Massachusetts continued to have a noticeable trend of lateness at the 2026 tournament, with none of the first 8 matches beginning on time, and none of the first 8 fixtures at the 2026 tournament beginning on schedule. Now, these was due to a number of reasons. Players making sure they're on time, making sure that FIFA was happy with how things were set, but it was roughly around about a 2 to 6 minute wait in some cases, but hopefully things will start to speed up. But the weekend results is what I can now tell you. Germany thrashed Curacao with a 7-1 victory over the course of this weekend and this morning. Japan equalized with the Netherlands in a surprise turn of 2-2. Brazil and Morocco drew 1-1, and Scotland beat Haiti with 1-0. Australia also beat Turkey over the weekend with a 2-0 result, and the Ivory Coast beat Ecuador with a 1-0 result. Now, Monday's games, Sweden beat Tunisia 5-1 as well, and Spain versus Cabo Verde is going to take place later on today, as well as Belgium against Egypt as well will be taking place later on today, which will have results in the course of the program. Now, just to highlight tomorrow's games is when Iran will play New Zealand as well. So we'll definitely keep you updated with everything that's going on. There's so much to talk about, and we have discussed some of those key elements with our guest that was just on, just talking about obviously the importance of the match, how many countries are involved this time around, making it one of the biggest tournaments, and it taking place over 3 different nations. So that's Canada, the US and Mexico, and it's Mexico City that actually launched the first kickoff on Friday with a number of games as well as performances with singer Shakira as well. So these are just some of the highlights coming out of it, but it all kicks off throughout the course of the coming days, and we'll definitely provide you with more information throughout the course of the program anyway. Now let's go over to our next story this morning, leading the headlines, and that's on the Guardian website, and that's in relation to Switzerland, because Swiss voters reject proposal to cap population at 10 million. Now, voters in Switzerland had decided to reject the far right's proposal to cap the country's population at 10 million in a divisive referendum dubbed as the Swiss Brexit. Now, there were 54.79% of voters were against the proposal by the Swiss People's Party, and 45.2% to 21% were in favour. Now, the overall turnover was just over half of the population at 58.86%. Now, if the outcome was actually in the party's favour, a different outcome would have meant that the Swiss government would have had to limit the population, which is currently at 9.1 million, to 10 million by 2050, and will have to enact tough restrictions on family reunification, residency permits and asylum if the number had reached 9.5 before that date. Now, under the proposals, if the threshold of 10 million people were exceeded before the 2050 date, the Swiss government would have to oblige to withdraw from the country's free movement agreement with the EU, ending its access to the bloc's single market, which is actually a big and major deal, which is why a number of them decided to vote against that. Now, the Swiss People's Party, which has the most seats in Parliament, has for years fueled anti-immigration sentiment, especially concerning workers from neighbouring EU countries. And this graph just shows some of the information there. But the party had insisted that what they called as an umbrella of the sustainability initiative was needed to address the increase in population, which it argued was putting pressure on Swiss infrastructure, housing, social programmes and natural resources and way of life there. Okay, let's turn over to our next story this morning, which will be everywhere because of the peace deal that was announced by Donald Trump. We head over to the BBC website, and it says Iran and US agree framework deal to end war as Trump says Strait of Hormuz will be reopened. Well, the US and Iran has reached a ceasefire agreement on Monday morning overnight, announcing that a deal with the Islamic Republic of Iran is now complete, is what President Donald Trump said and put on a post on social media. He said the agreement will be signed on Friday, and Iran and Pakistan said that that will take place in Geneva. Now, the text of the agreement was not immediately released as to what each side sought to agree upon, but has said that it's a diplomatic victory after nearly 4 months of war. But some of the thorniest issues that we've spoken about on the program, like the fate of Iran's nuclear program and sanctions released for Tehran, remain unresolved, as well as what will happen in relation to Lebanon, because we know that that's something that Iran was definitely pushing for, a ceasefire with Lebanon as well. And I can add that Israel has not commented on this particular peace deal that the US announced overnight. But now, why don't we go to our story, our top story report, which has more information in relation to this.
The United States and Iran have reached a framework agreement to end hostilities, US President Donald Trump announced on social media on Sunday. In a series of posts, Trump confirmed the deal is complete, authorizing the toll-free reopening of the Strait of Hormuz and calling for the immediate removal of the US naval blockade. He added that the deal will be signed on Friday. His announcement came shortly after Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif announced the agreement on social media, stating that it is intended to end fighting on all fronts, including Lebanon. Shehbaz Sharif also confirmed that an official signing ceremony is scheduled for Friday, June 19th in Switzerland. Reports indicate that US Vice President J.D. Vance may attend, while Trump's participation has not been fully confirmed. Iran's Deputy Foreign Minister Kazem Garibabadi, speaking on state TV, confirmed that the Memorandum of Understanding is finalized and that the US naval blockade against Iran will end Sunday night. He confirmed that military operations on all fronts, including Lebanon, will cease immediately and permanently. Iran's Supreme National Security Council also issued a statement confirming that military operations on all fronts will halt immediately and that the US blockade on Iranian shipping will be lifted. Following the announcement, the United Kingdom, France, Germany and Italy said on Sunday that they are prepared to lift sanctions on Iran in response to steps taken on its nuclear program. In a joint statement, the leaders emphasized that Iran must never acquire a nuclear weapon and said they are ready to work with the United States, Iran, and the IAEA to ensure compliance. Full implementation of the agreement is expected after the signing ceremony Friday, with Pakistan, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey credited for facilitating the negotiations.
Staying on this top story, and international reactions continue to pour in following the announcement of a peace memorandum between the US and Iran. Global leaders and the United Nations are welcoming the diplomatic breakthrough, emphasizing the immediate need to restore maritime stability and secure global energy corridors ahead of the formal signing ceremony in Switzerland. Here's a roundup of world reactions.
Major Western powers and global markets are calling for the swift execution of the US-Iran peace agreement. French President Emmanuel Macron and British Prime Minister Keir Starmer called for the unconditional reopening of the Strait of Hormuz to restore freedom of navigation. This optimism was echoed by German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, who described the deal as a breakthrough for the global economy. In the Asia-Pacific, leaders from Japan, Australia and New Zealand noted that stabilising energy shipments will directly ease pressure on global supply chains. Regional mediators are emphasising stability ahead of Friday's official signing ceremony in Switzerland. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan welcomed the agreement as a crucial step for regional tranquility, while urging all parties to refrain from actions or provocations that could undermine the diplomatic progress. Qatar also extended its backing, reaffirming its support for continued constructive dialogue. The global endorsements were backed by the United Nations, which hailed the framework as a critical step toward a peaceful settlement. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres formally congratulated both Washington and Tehran on the permanent ceasefire, while acknowledging the constructive role played by regional nations in supporting the negotiations.
Following on from this, the E4 nations, the UK, France, Germany and Italy, said on Sunday they were prepared to lift sanctions on Iran. It's in response to the steps taken regarding the nuclear program. In a joint statement, the leaders stressed that, quote, Iran must never acquire a nuclear weapon, saying they stand ready to work with the US, Iran and the International Atomic Energy Agency to achieve this goal. There are now fresh signs of relief for global energy markets as traders respond to the developments that could reshape oil supply flows from the Middle East. Here's more.
Oil prices fell sharply on Monday after the United States and Iran announced an initial agreement to end their conflict, raising hopes that energy supplies from the Middle East could begin returning to global markets. Brent crude dropped more than 4% to $83.75 a barrel, while US West Texas Intermediate fell nearly 5% to $80.87. Both benchmarks had already lost more than 3% last Friday. The latest decline comes after months of volatility driven by the conflict, which disrupted shipping and energy exports across the region. Before the conflict began in late February, Brent crude was trading at around $70 a barrel. During the conflict, prices surged to roughly $120 as concerns grew over supply shortages and disruptions to trade. Investors are now closely watching how quickly oil producers in the Middle East can restore production and exports, and whether shipping activity in the region returns to normal. Analysts warn the market could face another week of uncertainty and sharp price swings as traders await further details of the agreement. Energy experts have also cautioned that oil flows through the Strait of Hormuz are unlikely to return to pre-conflict levels immediately, meaning a full recovery in supply could take time.
Turning to Europe, and Kyiv has been hit by major Russian airstrikes, killing at least 4 people and injuring 23, with power cuts across the city and damage near a UNESCO-listed site. 5 more people were killed in Kharkiv as attacks continue ahead of the G7 summit.
Kyiv came under a series of Russian air attacks early Monday, leaving 6 people injured and igniting fires at a high-rise apartment building and the historic Pechersk Lavra monastery. Electricity lines were damaged, leaving 140,000 residents without power. Explosions from drones and missiles were reported across the city, and air raid warnings extended to the regions of Dnipro and Kharkiv. In Kharkiv, Russian airstrikes killed 5 people and injured at least 5 more, authorities said. The attacks caused significant damage to residential buildings and infrastructure across the city. Meanwhile, in Russia's Oriol city, Ukrainian drones struck a high-rise apartment building, killing 1 person and injuring 9 others. Amid the attacks, diplomacy continues. US President Donald Trump held separate calls on Sunday with Russian President Vladimir Putin and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, discussing efforts to end the war in Ukraine and developments involving Iran ahead of the upcoming G7 summit.
I have just spoken with the President of the United States of America, with President Trump. I congratulated him on his birthday, on US Army Day. Today, there are 2 holidays in America, and we had a very good conversation. It was not just congratulations. There were many key topics about the war, its roots, and diplomatic prospects.
The Kremlin said Trump's call with Putin lasted 55 minutes and focused on the conflict, bilateral relations, and coordination between officials. Trump's special envoys, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, are expected to return to Moscow to continue discussions.
Staying on this, Poland scrambled fighter jets and placed its air defense systems on high alert on Monday after Russia launched attacks on Kyiv and other parts of Ukraine. The Polish armed forces said the measures were aimed at protecting airspace near the Ukrainian border. Military operations later ended with no violations of Polish airspace reported. 11 skydivers and a pilot have died after a private aircraft crashed in Missouri in the United States. The plane went down shortly after taking off from a local airport around 100 kilometers away south of the Kansas City on Sunday. According to the aircraft operator, the plane failed to gain altitude, made a sharp left turn and crashed near the runway. Local officials say some family members of those on board witnessed the crash. Uruguay's preparations for their opening match of the FIFA World Cup have been disrupted after their flight to the United States was delayed due to a documentation error, according to local media reports. The FIFA paperwork needed for the team's travel was not ready when the flight was due to depart from Mexico on Sunday. It delayed their trip by several hours. Uruguay are scheduled to face Saudi Arabia in their Group H opener on Monday in Miami. The delay may also lead to the cancellation of pre-match press conference with Uruguay's head coach and team captain.
If we go back in time, maybe 6 weeks.
Staying on the World Cup, Iran's national football team has arrived in LA under heavy security ahead of their opener against New Zealand on Tuesday. The squad landed at Los Angeles International Airport on Sunday after a short flight from Tijuana in Mexico. The team were escorted to their hotel just minutes from the stadium that is hosting Monday's Group G match. A significant police presence was already in place outside the hotel, with security barriers set up along the perimeter. Iran's match comes amid heightened tensions after the team's base was relocated from Arizona to Mexico due to security concerns. Today marks the first anniversary of the Shusha Declaration signed in 2021 in Shusha by the presidents of Azerbaijan, Ilham Aliyev, and Turkey's Recep Tayyip Erdogan. The agreement cemented allied relations and the strategic partnership between the two countries. It set out a roadmap for closer security cooperation, as well as economic and geo-economic ties. Over the 5 years since its signing, its provisions have been reflected in concrete outcomes, including closer defense industry cooperation, joint military exercises, and the development and energy transport.
Following the ceremony of signing Shusha Declaration, President of the Republic of Azerbaijan.
The third meeting of the heads of competition authorities of the Organization of the Turkic States brought together representatives of member and observer states to discuss regulatory cooperation, competition policy, anti-monopoly frameworks, and the development of a more integrated Turkic economic space. Here to discuss this is Yasar Sari, Director of Heydar Aliyev Center for the Euro-Asian Studies in İmam Haldun University, Istanbul, Turkey. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for inviting me.
That's fine. Let's get to my first question. And the OTS countries operate within a different economic system and regulatory environments. Should this process be understood as an attempt to achieve wholesale regulatory unification, or are we instead witnessing a more targeted approach?
I mean, let's not forget 2021 Organization of the Turkic State established. So, already 5 years passed, so it's a new international regional organization. This meeting is one of the important steps, even the beginning step, but still is an important step to having the head of the competition authorities of the full member state of the Organization of the Turkic State. They propose to create a single database of competition violation. That means that they are eager to act together. So this is the first step. This is the communique, diplomatic communique. If this first step is successful, which is they already signed this communique, then they will create effective implementation competition policies, first sharing the experience, conducting joint research, and develop the professional cooperation between the countries. As your question, you mentioned, is some of the members part of the different organization, like Turkey has custom union with the European Union, Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan part of the Eurasian Economic Union, to making them to come and join in creating the institution or the coordination, this competition violation issues, that's give them to a kind of leverage to establishing the more closer cooperation.
I see. Now, I just want to turn over to President Aliyev's address that we have here to participants at the conference on regional security in the South Caucasus, which was held in Shusha. And in particular, he described the 8th of August breakthrough as decisive, as well as a moment in history for the region and as a foundation of wider peace, stability and prosperity. Now, bearing in mind that he made these remarks there and coming immediately after the parliamentary elections in Armenia that we had a week ago today, what does that actually signify?
First, Shusha is for Turkic world is the very important city, very significant historical meaning. And the second thing is the 2021, Turkey and Azerbaijan signed the Shusha Declaration. That is the very significant documents. The reason is two countries are establishing strategic alliances. For that reason, Shusha is important. The second thing is I want to emphasize, Azerbaijan is right now is chairing the organization of the Turkic state meetings, and President Ilham Aliyev, long time, is emphasizing that we need to turn this organization to more closer, more strongly bonded organization, including the security area. And the third is as you already also mentioned, the election in Armenia resulted Nikol Pashinyan, current prime minister, to continue his mandate. So Pashinyan eager to signing the peace treaty with Azerbaijan, having the close cooperation, both Azerbaijan and Turkey. So that is giving the new opportunity to first creating a peaceful atmosphere in the Caucasus. The second thing is Caucasus, especially Azerbaijan and Armenia, can be a place to connecting the Central Asian Turkic state with the Turkey and the Europe. So that is very significant. So the President Ilham Aliyev mentioned that one, and they repeated again to member state and the public opinion of this state, saying that this is a good opportunity if the Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan kept his promise, then the Caucasus can turn to a peaceful and stable place. That is giving them a huge opportunity, the Turkic state also connecting each other.
Okay, no, that's exactly that. And I think if we also just look at the 5th anniversary of the Shusha Declaration as well, and its continuing significance for regional geopolitical politics, especially Azerbaijan and Turkey relations and the wider strategic architecture of the South Caucasus, how crucial and important is marking that anniversary?
I mean, the first thing is Shusha Declaration bond very strongly security area between Turkey and Azerbaijan. And this can be an example for the other member states. And this Shusha Declaration can be extended to other member states of the Organization of Turkic States. That is the Ilham Aliyev long time mentioning. We need to turn the Organization of Turkic States also security organization, collective security organization. We need to act together for keeping the peaceful condition both in Caucasus and the Central Asia. So in that sense, it's very significant. And as already mentioned, the Azerbaijan is leading to Organization of Turkish State, currently chairing the organization, as well as the Azerbaijan leading country, making this member states to act together, not the only economic area, but the security. So he reminded us that.
I see. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Sari, for that and for coming onto the program to explain that. That's been very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you for the invitation. Have a nice program.
Okay, now you're watching Daybreak. Let's go to a very quick break, and when I return, I'll have a number of stories. Don't go anywhere.
Inside Politics delves deeply into the heart of global issues shaping our world today. Join me for your go-to source of political analysis from across the region and beyond.
Welcome to A News, unfiltered news and analysis from the region and beyond. From Washington to Beijing, Tehran to Kabul, to Tbilisi to Tashkent. Hello, I'm Jay. That's challenges.
Today is the third.
We're with you 24/7, taking you live to the front lines of the day's biggest stories. Welcome to Gabon. One important note to fears. I'm here.
Azerbaijan and Armenia.
Hello, we are reporting on the shade of November.
Reporting from Paris,
Dar es Salaam, Tel Aviv,
Washington,
London,
Moscow,
Kyiv, Berlin,
Rio de Janeiro, Beijing, Bangkok, Tbilisi, Tashkent, Almaty, Kazakhstan, Port Sudan, Tehran, Islamabad, Istanbul,
Kabul, for A News.
Welcome back. You're watching Daybreak with me, Nadia Gyane. Now let's head over to some of the World Cup results that's been taking place our time this morning, because the 2026 FIFA Cup is already delivering so many memorable moments, with early results shaping the race for a place in the knockout stages. From dominant performances by tournament favourites to surprising upsets, the competition is providing plenty of drama and talking points for fans around the world. Now let's go to our graphic that has some of the key results, because we have the Ivory Coast that played Ecuador and won 1-0 over that. And then on Sunday into Monday, we have Germany that played Curacao and won 7-1 with quite a number of goals there. And then we had the Netherlands and Japan drawing 2-2. And then there was Sweden versus Tunisia, and Sweden won 5-1 in that particular game as well. So all that information, as you can see on your screens, and we'll provide you with more as each day goes by as to how the teams are doing in the World Cup. From the World Cup now, results to cute pups over in Shanghai. Dogs are going to school. And it's called Paw Cubed, a luxury canine kindergarten where dogs spend the day socializing, running on treadmills, enjoying snacks and listening to live piano music. The school began with 10 dogs and now hosts 200. China's urban pet market reached $46 billion in 2025 and is set to exceed $59 billion by 2028. With declining birth rates and changing lifestyles, pets are increasingly treated as family, boosting demand for premium services like daycare, grooming and training. Wow, those dogs look very, very cute. They even get to have the luxury of having a pianist play for them throughout the course of their day. Well, that's been the stories for this morning. As you know, that the top story with the US-Iran peace deal making its way across the day, we'll be very much looking closely at that and following reactions from around the world, as you saw. So please make sure you stay tuned to AE News, and I'll be back tomorrow morning to take you through a number of key stories for the day. Take care.